This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Roots and All in 2024, and a happy new year to you. This episode features horticulturist, garden designer, RHS Show Judge and plant guru Nina Baxter. We talk about what garden designers do, why they differ from landscapers, how you can find one, and what they might charge for their work. Whether you're thinking of hiring a garden designer, thinking about becoming one, or are just curious about the profession, this is worth a listen. Nina begins by describing her journey into garden design.
Like a lot of people in garden design, I came to it later. I think most people I come across, it's generally either a second or third career, I think. So for me, it was a third career, really. And I got into it because my mother-in-law was a garden designer and said, right, we have to do your garden. I think that's the other thing that gets you into it, is having your own garden. So I was very lucky that I was being made redundant. That sounds weird, but I worked for an organisation that was a short life organisation. It was the Millennium Commission. So it was going to finish, and I got a redundancy payment that allowed me to retrain. So I trained, first of all, in plantsmanship. Plants and plantsmanship, the diploma used to be called, because I got it into my head that actually I wanted to grow plants and be a nurseryman. And then I quickly realised how incredibly hard that would be as a career. And while I was doing the course, I got excited by planting design. So I went on to do the garden design diploma and sort of went on from there. But this was a while ago now. And so I went straight out and started to do it myself on my own. And I think probably now, if I was doing it again, I would go and work with someone else first, because I would probably make fewer mistakes that way and would learn a bit faster. And it's also quite a lonely career. So teaming up with other people and maybe working with somebody else first is probably a good way to do it. So then, so I've been designing gardens for over 20 years and got into show garden planting for other designers. So I did that for sort of 17 years. And now, as a result of that, I've become an RHS Shows Judge myself. And I sit on the selection panels for show gardens. And I chair some of the judging panels too. So it's really nice now to be doing it from that side, and looking at all the poor people who are struggling away planting their gardens, and thinking, I'm quite glad I'm not doing that anymore. So recently I've just taken on the directorship at the London College of Garden Design, because something else that I've always really loved to do is teach and pass on a knowledge and mentor and help people. And so that's what I'm doing. And mainly I'm overseeing the planting design diploma, which is fantastic.
I was going to say, you've certainly put in your time at the coalface, haven't you, at the show gardens? So yeah, that's a well-deserved kind of rest, I think.
I've never been a garden designer who's hands-off, because I came at it from the planting side of things first. I still set out my plants, and I still quite often get in there and plant my plants. I don't just leave it to landscapers, and because I love it. I love that part of it. And I am a control freak too, so I don't really like other people doing it for me.
I've kind of spoken about show gardens in the past on the podcast. There is a lot of crossover between the show gardens and what happens in the real world, if you like, when it comes to garden design. And thinking about the kind of real world application of garden design, who might need a garden designer?
I say to people generally, look, you wouldn't go about building a house without a plan for it. And I do generally think that it is the same with a garden. Now, obviously, I'm not saying if you just want to lay your garden to lawn and have a couple of borders around the outside, that's a different matter. But if you want to have a garden, if you want to have a space that works for you, and you're getting the maximum out of it, then a design is really worthwhile for anybody. I think the benefits are that, first of all, you're able to avoid mistakes. And I had, over the course of my career, a lot of people come to me where they have piecemeal sort of been doing their gardens and they're just not happy with it. Certain things haven't worked. One person in particular, I remember, had a sort of a patio built in the middle of their lawn that actually just looked like a bandstand. And they said, we have no idea why we did this. So you're going to avoid expensive mistakes. That's number one. Number two, you're going to know at the beginning of it what it's going to cost you. Again, you can get a very good landscaper to come in and you can say, well, I want some paving here and I want some lawn there and so on. But without a plan, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually cost it up accurately. So with a set of plans from a garden designer, you know what it's going to cost you. You're able to, value engineer it if you need to. That's the benefit of having a roadmap, having a plan. And I think everybody would benefit from that if they've got the money, obviously, and if they want to have a space that is a bit more than, as I say, just a lawn.
Yeah, when you think about a house, you kind of know roughly what your house is going to look like. You might go to a builder and say, here's a budget that I want you to work within, or you presumably an architect in the first instance, that I want to work within that budget. Garden design, I think, is slightly different because I think there's that personal input from the client, which can actually change costs quite dramatically. So is it fair to say that from the outset, it might be more difficult to get an overall budget nailed down? Or is that what garden designers are for? They can actually say, right, this is your budget, I can work within that, and this is what you can achieve for that budget.
I think a good, experienced garden designer will be able to give you a ballpark figure of what the costs are likely to be given your wish list. So there is always a conversation, and I try to have that conversation as soon as possible, about budget. You want people to be realistic. And I always say, there's no point in me designing you the Hanging Gardens of Babylon if you can't afford it. We've got to work within people's budgets, but at the same time, I'm trying to give them the maximum for what they've got. I take your point. It is different, obviously, from a house, because you do roughly know what kind of rooms you want and so on. But let's sort of look at it from the point of view of an interior designer, for example, somebody who can make. I had somebody come around the other day. I'm hopeless at interiors, incidentally. I don't think the two things go hand in hand, being able to design a garden or an interior. So I had an interior person come around to help me design, work out storage space in my house. And they came up with things that I just wouldn't have thought of and put things in different places. So what the garden designer is there to do is to take your wish list, your desires, your imaginings of what you really want this space to look like, and to work with that, to push you a little bit, to make sure you're not making mistakes, advise you against sort of costly errors, and suggest things that you wouldn't have thought of. So I do think that somebody who's got experience will be able to say, okay, if this is your wish list and this is your space, this is roughly what you're going to be looking at. Does that work for you? And if it doesn't, we need to rebalance it somewhere.
Yeah, and I guess also they could actually make you savings because, like you said, with the storage, they can think of things that you may not have thought of, or multiple uses for a particular aspect of the garden. So yeah, I see that. So if someone was looking for a garden designer, where would they go? Where should they go to find one that is reputable? And, are there certain things that people need to look out for, such as qualifications, insurance, all the rest of that sort of thing that protects the consumer?
Yes, absolutely. I think it very much depends where you are. Now, I work in Southeast London, and there's a lot of people and a lot of garden designers. And most people, I would say, find me through either word of mouth or local forums and Mumsnet and things like that. Or they find me through my own website, and then there are testimonials they can look at. There are other people they can talk to. But I'm in a high density area. I think if you're more into the countryside or a lower density area, then there are organisations like the Society of Garden Designers, Barley, British Association of Landscaping Industries, and APL, Association of Professional Landscapers. They all have lists of people who have had to go through rigorous checks. So that's a good starting place if you don't automatically have a recommendation from somebody. But as I say, I think it's horses for courses and where you are. I mean, I personally don't tend to get people coming to me through any of those organisations, because I am in this sort of area where everybody talks to each other, especially mums. So I get to do a lot around the same area. Now that I've been doing it a long time, I get clients coming back, for their second or third properties. So that's what I would recommend. But always look at a few people, always try to get testimonials and look at their websites, see what they've done, see what their experience is, because that will tell you a lot.
So if you find your garden designer, you like their style, you've seen their testimonials, you've had a kind of initial chat with them, how might the process work? Now, I'm guessing it is going to be varying between designers, but, as a kind of general overview, how might the process work once you'd found someone that you liked?
Yeah, you're right. It is going to really vary between designers, and it's also going to vary, again, it's that sort of geographical thing. But generally, you would perhaps have an initial phone conversation with the designer. And I think that's just to sort of establish, well, how do they work and what people can expect. And then if there's a sort of rapport that is built up, I mean, some people don't do this, some people just do it purely by email, but I like to have a quick chat. And then they would organise an initial visit. Now, that initial visit is sometimes chargeable and sometimes not. Personally, if people are within a radius of me that I can go to within 15, 20 minutes, and again, it comes back to that being in a high density area, then I don't charge for my initial visit. It tends to be quite quick. The gardens that I'm looking at are relatively small, so I feel that that's actually quite a good investment. If I've got the idea that this person is serious about it, and there are lots of garden designers in my area who I'll be competing with, then it's a good investment for me to go and pop over. If I'm asked to go 3 or 4 hours away, or in another location, then I think, yes, that would be chargeable, because, that person is a professional. They're taking time to go and visit you and give you some initial inspiration about your garden. So that's the initial consultation. And then I would come back and give them a quotation for the design and set out exactly what they would be getting for that and the phases of it. And I think it's very much about rapport. I think that first visit that you have with the designer, you do build the rapport. You have got to work together as a partnership. And if you do have reservations about that from the start, then it's important not to get into something that you've got a gut feeling about being wrong. So once you get going, then there is the consultation process. There is the gathering of information. So that's your site survey, looking at everything from aspect, orientation, soil type, etc., and putting it all together. And then the designer will come back to you with concept and take it from there up to final design.
Okay, so I think that some clients might think to themselves, they're shopping around, they're not entirely sure how much a garden design is going to cost, and they may have a landscaper that's come along and said, I can do this, I can, set your garden out for you, you then just go and plant it. Or they may have a builder who's kind of said similar, I can put your, hard landscaping down for you. What would be the benefits to having a garden designer in that situation?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, I suppose, and knowing what you're getting. There are landscapers who do design, but it'd be interesting to know, I think you need to ask them exactly what it is you're getting. Are you getting a scribble on the back of a packet of something, or are you getting a set of plans? And that's the first thing, I think, because it's only really with a set of plans that you actually know exactly what you're getting, and therefore, to a good degree of accuracy, what you're going to pay for it. I think the biggest problem with builders or landscapers saying, we can build this for you, and just sort of describing it and not actually having a plan, is you really don't know exactly what it is you're getting. So, I think there are some good landscapers out there who also offer a design service. That's one thing. But landscaping and design are two very different things, obviously. So the benefit of having the plans is that you really know what it is you're going to be getting. Garden designers nowadays are able to present to people a real vision of what their garden will look like, because there's so much wonderful software out there. I use SketchUp, but there's all sorts of things to show people 5 years down the line, this is kind of what your garden's going to look like. And that's something that's very important, so that people have an understanding of what that space is going to become.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it, as well? It's knowing how the plants and things are going to behave, all those bits that are slightly variable depending on the situation. And that's what the garden designer has the vision for. I think sometimes maybe it's perceived, but there could be a lack of transparency around garden designers and how they make their money or what fee they would charge. Is there a rule of thumb for, if I had a budget of £10,000 for a garden, could you say, it's likely that a percentage or this percentage is going to be given over to design fees? And what would people get for that fee generally?
Yes. And in fact, the Society of Garden Designers used to have this on their website. I don't think they do anymore, but generally you're kind of looking at about 9 or 10% of the cost. But there is a bit of a sliding scale because, depending on the overall cost of the project. So, but that's a very sort of ballpark figure of what you could expect to pay for the design. That's a percentage of the overall build. So that does involve that initial conversation with the garden designer about what this budget is in order for them to actually accurately give you a fee quotation. I think if somebody's going to be charging less than that, you have to ask yourself why and how they're making their living. A lot of garden designers, they earn their fees through the actual garden design, but they also then go on to supply plants. And now I do this, and a lot of us do, because it's how we make our living. And I'm always transparent and upfront with people about this. And I say, this is how I make some of my money. You need to be upfront with them that you are getting a trade discount on those plants, and that's how you're doing it. But what they're getting is your expertise. You're going and picking those plants out. You're making sure that those plants are healthy and they're in the right places and they're doing what they're supposed to do. So they get a big benefit from that. And as long as clients actually understand the benefit they're getting, then they're quite happy about it. What I never do is take money from landscapers, for example. I offer a project monitoring service, and a lot of garden designers do this because generally clients want somebody to oversee the process from start to finish. And I charge for that, and we all charge for that because it is time. But what it means is that we are independent and we can offer that independent advice, and we are a team with the client, and we can pick up any mistakes made and so on. If you're taking payments from landscapers, then you're not going to be able to do that. So I think people should absolutely be transparent and upfront about costs, but equally, I think clients should be realistic about the amount of work there is involved and understand that cheaper is not necessarily better. I think that's true of everything, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So you mentioned, obviously, your work in planting design. Is it possible then that you could maybe cherry pick what you get the designer to do? And are there some that specialise in hard landscaping and some that specialise in planting? And, can you separate those things out?
So if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have probably said, no, most people are garden designers and garden designers do planting. Now, the situation is changing. And I do very much believe there is a role for planting designers. And that's partly why I'm running the planting design diploma at the London College of Garden Design, because, for example, lots of people don't want the full makeover of a garden. Either it's a cost thing or they're quite happy with the hard landscaping they've got, but they do want a refresh and their borders aren't looking good. So a planting designer can come in and look over the garden as a whole, do a refresh, do a replanting. And there's a lot of call for that these days. I think also there is an area for planting designers now that's opening up because of sustainability. and the environment. And I think there is a real call for people who genuinely understand plants and know what will work in a particular space, in a particular site, with the conditions that there are. And because what we're looking to do now as planting designers is sustainable planting, and not plants that die every year and have to be replaced all the time. There is more scope now for somebody to employ just a planting designer or somebody to do just planting design. Often they're employed by other designers or landscape architects who don't have those sort of skills. Now developers are having to prove that there is a biodiversity net gain from the softscapes around their projects, and they need people who understand how to do that. And that's where planting designers are going to come in and are going to start to become more important, I think, as time goes on.
And again, I guess it's a project specific, but thinking about the planting particularly, going forwards, when does the relationship with the garden designer stop? I'm thinking about ongoing maintenance and how the garden develops.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I still have a relationship with a lot of my clients, and not that I'm constantly going back there and maintaining their spaces, but, you know, gardens are a never-ending, ever-changing picture. You know, you don't just do it and that's it, and they sit there in aspic. So I quite regularly go back, and I think a lot of garden designers do. They have a service where they might go back annually, they might look over what's worked, what hasn't worked. They might work with the maintenance team that's there, the aftercare team, as I like to call them, to make sure that the garden is working. You know, I can't think of any garden that I've planted where 100% of the plants have absolutely thrived. It's just, that's a very difficult thing. I mean, you know, we're going for kind of 95 to 98%, which is fine, but there are always going to be little problematic issues, problematic areas that you need to look at. So I think it's a really good idea to keep a relationship with the designer. But also, I think you need to find a maintenance and aftercare team who understand the designer's intentions, but also really understand the site and what the client likes, and work towards constantly really sort of evolving that and taking the garden forward. I think that's incredibly important, and I'm always encouraging my clients to do that. The clients that just think, right, that's it, that's done, I'm not going to I'm not going to bother too much with aftercare, it goes wrong horribly quickly for them.
I think what I'm getting from what you've said so far really is that actually it's key to find the right person to start with, and then it's key to keep that relationship open and keep communicating well, and, you know, so that it develops over time. With that in mind, if you could say one thing to people who are thinking of hiring a garden designer, what would your piece of advice be, or what would you like them to understand going into the process?
Okay, so I think two things. First of all, they need to have a rapport. There needs to be a sympathy between the two of them. I think there needs to be a complete understanding. But the second point, I think this is really, really important, is trust. Because you're hiring that person because they know a lot more than you do, and they have a lot more experience. And therefore, trusting them and letting them do their thing is really important. I would say the most successful gardens that I have designed have been the ones where clients have let me get on with it and not try to change things too much or rein stuff in too much. Obviously, you know, you've got to take the client's wishes and likes and dislikes into consideration, and that's what that process is about. But the clients who then commit and don't halfway through a project suddenly get cold feet and go, oh, actually, I think that border's too big, can you make it smaller? Those ones who commit are the most successful garden designs.
Thank you very much to Nina. Sadly, Dr. Ian Bedford isn't recording any more Bug of the Weeks for the time being, so I have no nature insights to share with you this week. If any entomologists are listening and would like to contribute material to the show, please do get in touch. Thanks for listening.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.